Welcome to the DMZ. Today we're going to be going over all of the best settings, whether that's keyboard and mouse, controller, graphics, interface, audio, and a couple extras at the end so that you can have your game running crisp and snappy. I'll also have timestamps below, so if you need to jump between sections, feel free to do so. For keyboard and mouse, you're going to want to use what sensitivity works best for you, whether that's low, high, medium, etc. And all of these settings here are relative to that, so I'm going to leave that to you. Now for the gameplay section, there's a few things that we want to consider. Automatic sprint is personal preference. You can have this off, or if you're going to have it on, put it on automatic tactical sprint. With that, you also want to set your tactical sprint behavior to single tap run. This is going to provide you the smoothest experience possible. Outside of that, a lot of these are personal preference, but the one that absolutely is not is the armor plate behavior. This needs to be set to apply all. It's going to make plating way more consistent and faster, especially in the heat of moment. Now, just like sensitivity when it comes to keybinds, this is all going to be personal preference. Use what works best for you. For controller, there's a few things that we're going to want to go over. The first is we're going to want to go to our edit button layout. There's only two things you really need to change here. And what that's going to be is you are going to want to switch your right stick and your B button. That's going to swap the slide button and the melee button. What that's going to do is it's going to put slide on your right stick. That's going to allow you to move around and slide and shoot without taking your thumbs off of the thumbsticks. This is super important. The next tip that I have is, if possible, if you have buttons underneath your controllers, aka paddles, I strongly advise setting jump to one of those paddles. That's going to drastically improve your combat experience within the DMZ. Now, regarding sensitivity, just like mouse and keyboard, this is preference, but most Call of Duty professionals do use a sensitivity of 4.4, 5.5, or 6.6. Use what you think is best for you though. Now, when we get down here to the gameplay settings, there are a few things that we want to go over. We absolutely want to have automatic tactical sprint on controller. Unlike keyboard and mouse, we are able to move slowly by pushing the stick forward. So having automatic tactical sprint is a no-brainer because we can move slow or fast with the press of our left stick. The next setting you're going to want to have is the interact with reload behavior set to either prioritize interact or tap to interact. This is going to allow you to enter vehicles, climb zip lines, pick up loot a lot faster than players that don't have this. Use which one you like, go ahead and experiment with both. And the last setting, just like keyboard and mouse, armor plate behavior absolutely needs to be set to apply all. It's significantly smoother and faster. Once we get to the advanced settings, you're going to want to make sure your aim assist is on. You're going to want to make sure your aim assist type is set to default, as this has been tested by many players, and default is the best one overall. You want your ADS aim assist type on, and third person is irrelevant. Now, when we get to the aim response curve type, most professionals use dynamic, but again, just like sensitivity, it's preference, though I strongly recommend using dynamic. The next setting we're going to talk about is input dead zone. This is super important for controller players if they want to maximize their aim assist. Now, for these dead zones, I leave everything at default except for the left stick min. All right, this is going to be our movement stick right here. I go and put that to 0, as that's going to help maximize and make rotational aim assist as consistent as possible. Jumping into the graphics section, we're going to start on the display tab. With this, you're going to want to go full screen. Make sure your appropriate monitor is selected. Also, make sure your graphics card is selected. I turn dynamic resolution off, aspect ratio automatic. You don't need to restart your shader optimization unless you're having troubles in the game. If your graphics are acting weird, do a restart shaders optimization, and then reboot your game. For gamma, we leave that at 2.2. For brightness, I generally prefer a brightness of 55. Just a slight increase, but this is going to drastically vary depending on what monitor or TV you're using. For constraint mouse to game window, we leave that off. For eco mode preset, that is set to custom. I turn VSync off, and for custom frame rate, I max out the gameplay custom frame rate, and I lock the menu and out of focus to 60 and 60. Now, when we come to the quality tab, this is where you're going to see a lot of performance gains and visibility gains. But I want to preface this by, if you have a very weak machine and you're struggling to run the game, you are going to want to just set it to minimum. All right. Once you set it to minimum, make sure you turn your render resolution back up to 100, or it's going to look really bad. And if you have an incredibly expensive and beast machine, you might just be able to set this to extreme and be just fine. But if you want high frames per second and good visibility, follow me. So within here, we're going to want to make sure our render resolution is set to 100. We're going to want to select Fidelity FX Cast, and you're going to want to put this strength anywhere from 50 to 100. It's personal preference. Afterwards, we're going to want to set our anti-aliasing to Filmic SMA to T2X and set that to high. Now for your video memory scale, this is again going to be one of those things that drastically depends on your graphics card. I would definitely play with this, bringing it from 50 all the way to 90 and just see how your game performs. If your game is stuttering when you're at 90, bring it down to 50. If it's stuttering when you're at 50, bring it up to 90. If not, try something in the middle ground. I personally prefer 70 as this is what works best with my graphics card. For our details and textures, we're going to set texture resolution to normal, texture filter anisotropic to high, nearby level of detail to low, distant level of detail to low, blur draw distance to short, particle quality to low as this one has a major FPS impact, particle quality level to very low as similar to particle quality, this has a major FPS impact, bullet impacts on, though if you want them off, it doesn't really matter, it's up to you, persistent damage layers off, shader quality to low. Now this setting is a special one. This setting has the biggest impact on your frames as possible, but it's also worth noting that the higher you bring this setting, the better and farther thermal optics will work within the DMZ. So if you love thermal optics and you want to sacrifice some FPS, go ahead and set this to medium or high. Otherwise, set it to low. Tessellization is going to be off, and on-demand texture streaming is going to be set to minimal. You're then going to click show more and turn the allocated texture cache size to its minimum amount, being 16. Enable the download limit and also put this down to the lowest setting possible so that this thing gets capped out as soon as possible and stops downloading textures. All right. Afterwards, we're going to set our streaming quality to low, our volumetric quality to low, deferred physics quality off, and water quality default. When we get to our shadow and lighting, we're going to set shadow map resolution to normal, as this again is going to give you the best visibility and frames per second as possible. You're going to want your screen space shadows off, your spot shadow quality low, your spot cache on high, because this setting is a particular one in which if you set it too low, you may introduce a ton of stuttering within DMZ for whatever reason. So you're going to want to set that to high or ultra if you can. Particle lighting is going to be set to low, ambient occlusion is going to be set to off, and screen space reflections also off. Static reflection quality low, weather grid volumes low, or even off. For the most part, I don't think there's even any weather settings really left in DMZ once we passed the sandstorm that was several seasons back, so feel free to turn that low or off. For the last settings, we're going to have NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency to on or on plus boost if your computer can handle that, and the rest of these following settings are going to be off with film grain at 0. On the View tab, you're going to want to set your FOV. Anything between 90 and 120 is typically considered good. Personally, I use 110 as I find 120 to be a bit too much, but it's personal preference. Use what works best for you. The one thing to note about this setting is that the higher you put this setting, the smaller targets are going to appear from a long distance and the less visual recoil you're going to have. Simultaneously, when you are set to a lower field of view, the bigger your targets are going to be, which is going to make it easier to spot targets at long distance, but also make your visual recoil that much more intrusive. So play around with it and see what works best for you. For ADS field of view, we're going to have affected, for weapon field of view, default, for third person field of view, 90, and for vehicle field of view, default. For these settings down here, we're going to set the least camera movement at 50%, the least third person of 50%, the third person ADS transition to third person ADS, and the default spectator camera to game perspective. Now for your audio mix, you're going to want to set this to headphones, though this does vary heavily depending on the headset you're using, so you might want to play around with it, but the one that is generally considered best is going to be headphones, or sometimes even PC if you play on PC. For the volume, you're going to want to have master game volume set to whatever works best for you. I typically advise 100. You're then going to set gameplay music volume to 0, dialogue volume to 30, effects to 100, as this is what's going to dictate how well you're going to hear footsteps, and cinematic music volume typically to 0, but 10 if you like to have a little background noise when you're at the menu like me. War tracks is going to be set to 0, at least if you're a content creator, because otherwise you may get copyright striked. But if you're an everyday player, you can go ahead and set this to something like 50 so that it's not too loud and interrupts other sounds that might be important, but you can also have a good time. Now, voice chat volume is again one of those things that are preference. I definitely advise bringing it from at least 100 down to 50 so that your teammates aren't super loud and don't overpower potential footsteps in fights for you. Lastly, you're going to want to scroll down all the way down and change this one to on, Juggernaut music to off, hit markers to MW, and mute game minimize to off. Next, we're going to go into the interface settings, and these are actually a lot more important than people realize. When we get here, the first thing we're going to want to go to is color customization. Once inside, you're going to want to select color filter 2. You're then going to want to set color filter target to both and crank these both to 100. This is going to improve the color of your game, making it easier to spot targets at a distance. You're then going to want to scroll down till you get to crosshairs. You're going to want to turn your crosshairs on. You're then also going to scroll down to center dot and turn your center dot on. Now, for your center dot scale, having default larger or largest is preference, but if you have trouble aiming, I'd strongly advise putting this on largest so you can really keep track of where you're aiming at all times, as it's going to really help improve your aim if you're struggling. Lastly, if you're on PC, make sure to set your telemetry to custom and turn FPS counter on. You need to be knowing what your frames are running at, especially after you apply a bunch of graphic settings like we're doing in today's video. Now, a couple settings that I also want to talk about are color improvements. Now, you can do this whether you're on PC or console, all right? If you're on console, you're going to need to go to either your TV or your monitor and increase either the saturation or the vibrance. This is going to drastically improve the color in the game, helping you spot players at a long distance. Now, if you're on PC, you can do this via your monitor in the NVIDIA control panel or the AMD Radeon control panel. Feel free to jump into those, increase your vibrance or your saturation to helpfully boost the colors and help you see at further distances. I hope all these settings helped you guys. If you like this type of content, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below on anything else that you'd like me to make a video about that would help you within the DMZ. Anyways, see you guys next time. Later.